Hello everyone, it's Old Guardian here, and this is the Warcraft Rumble Mini Talent Guide. I'm going to take a look at all of the leaders and all of the other minis and all of their talents and tell you which ones are worth choosing. Choosing a talent is really important because once you get to Uncommon, then you will get one talent slot. And once you buy a talent for that slot, you cannot change it. You cannot change that talent until your mini gets to rare, at which point you will unlock a second talent slot, then you can buy a second talent, and then you can choose which talent is actually active. All the talents are unique, so there's almost 200 talents in this game. And when trying to look at the talents, I first try to see, okay, if there's something really new that the talent brings to the mini, something that the mini was unable to do before that. Then ways to control the game are always great. Ways to stun something, freeze something, I really like that. That changes how the fights go. Additional damage, of course, additional damage is also good. Cost reduction is also good. You can always play more stuff. And survivability, so that the minis stay on the board for longer. Those are some of the main things that I look for when I look at talents. But let's take a look at all of the minis. First the leaders by family and then all the other minis in alphabetical order. There are chapters in this video, so you can just use those chapters to find exactly the mini you want. You don't want to watch them all. So starting with Alliance leaders, we have Jaina Proudmoore. Jaina is not considered one of the strongest leaders, but she definitely has her fans. And there are a couple of different playstyles that you can go for with Jaina. Blink is the most commonly chosen option for Jaina, so Jaina is attacked and Jaina teleports away, so she isn't as easy to attack again. However, Blink can also sometimes fail, it can move Jaina in the wrong direction, and it's not always super good. Personally, I like Flurry, because Flurry makes your enemies slower, and I like slowing things down a lot, because that allows more control, but Flurry is the option that's generally considered to be weakest, because there are definitely fans for clear casting. Clear casting allows you to play some spells for cheaper, so typically you would go Jaina and you would have Arcane Blast with the talent that makes it a little bit more expensive, but then you have clear casting and then you have some Arcane Blast action going on after Jaina. That's something that also works. But if you want to go with where the masses are, you would choose Blink, and I really like Flurry for the control effect, but clear casting if you intend to build a specific type of deck that uses that. Tirion Fordring is one of the strongest leaders in the game, and Tirion also has some really good talents. Divine Shield is a phenomenal talent. If Tirion is your main tank, if Tirion is the one that goes into the battle first, and then Tirion is taking lots of hits, and then Divine Shield, and boom, Tirion just keeps staying alive. On the other hand, sometimes you also use Tirion as your second line tank, and then By the Light becomes stronger, because By the Light just heals up minions a lot. Also, if Tirion can survive a fight and then heal himself up, and in those cases By the Light is also stronger. So By the Light is perhaps the most common, although it is a very close contest between Divine Shield and By the Light. Consecrate is something that very few people use, and many people say that it's bad, but I don't quite agree that it's bad. It is strong against squads, for example, and it allows Tirion to do some things that Tirion usually doesn't do, which is AoE damage. Then again, Consecrate is clearly a niche talent and not as common as the other two picks. Maiev Shadowsong also has 3 interesting talents. Remorseless is generally the most popular option. Deal double damage for 2 seconds after killing an enemy, so if Maiev gets to kill something, then Maiev just becomes a machine. However, people sometimes also use Shadow Step, periodic teleport to a ranged attacker when hit, which can be useful so that Maiev can close in that distance. There are also some uses for enveloping shadows. If you want to build a deck where you'd like to use Smoke Bomb, but you don't want to use a deck slot for Smoke Bomb, then you get Maiev and Smoke Bomb on top for free if you use enveloping shadows. But Remorseless is generally the most popular one. Then we come to the Beast leaders and Old Murk-Eye. Old Murk-Eye is one of my favorite leaders. Generally the most used talent for Old Murk-Eye is Marathon of the Murlocs, because that gives you more time to get more Tidehunters. So you get a little bit more gold, so you get 1 or 2 more Tidehunters in that time. I don't really like Marathon of the Murlocs that much myself though, because I generally find that I can get enough Tidehunters anyway, and I prefer Electric Eels. Electric Eels with the stun ability. Sometimes those Murk-Eye stuns something, Murlocs hit into it, and boom, you can just drop things that would otherwise cause you a lot of trouble. Then there's Tip of the Spear, but that is largely useless and sometimes even counterproductive. Maybe with some strategies, but often it's really good that the Murlocs spawn in your base, so that you will be able to push multiple lanes or push in multiple waves. So Tip of the Spear just seems to remove some of the good stuff about Murk-Eye. Hogger is also a tremendously fun leader, and Ham-Hog. Ham-Hog is such a great talent for Hogger. Hogger also gains plus 10 max health each time he is played. Hogger already is going to deal a lot of damage when you play him a few times, so with Ham-Hog he also gains a lot of survivability and becomes just an incredible machine. There is some argument also for spoiled meat, gain poison, so then Hogger deals even more damage, but damage usually isn't Hogger's problem anyway, so I'm not so convinced about that one. And then there's Fatal Frenzy on Death Bloodlust nearby beasts, but that doesn't usually contribute much in Hogger decks because Hogger decks are all about Hogger. For Charlga Razorflank, I actually prefer the Spirit Passage, even though Spirit Passage has pretty narrow application, because minis played for 5 gold gain a level and deploy in stealth. And with right setup, you can make a stealth gargoyle, and that can be pretty overwhelming sometimes. That said, Nature's Grasp is somewhat more versatile, just can help you control fights and isn't so niche. And then there's also Cavernous Mist, which saves gold, so saving gold is never bad. So all Charlga's talents are somewhat usable. The most popular talent for General Drakkisath is Chromatic Scales, grants nearby allies the resistant trait. So then your team is just going to be much more resistant, much harder to damage, and that's great. Although Drakkisath is really slow, so it's hard for Drakkisath to keep up with other minis, and that makes it a little bit awkward. I personally use Piercing Blows also. Piercing Blows can be the best. I mean, AoE damage, not exactly AoE, it's piercing damage, so it's line damage instead of area damage, I guess, but it can improve Drakkisath's damage output. Then there's the Lasting Legacy, but that just doesn't do much at all, so I don't think anyone really uses that one. Rend Blackhand has 2 extremely strong talents. There's Scale and Steel, gain resistant while flying and armored while dismounted. And Scale and Steel is just the most versatile talent for Rend, it's always useful, it makes Rend much more tanky. But then there's also Flaming Soul. And Flaming Soul is a little bit more situational, but Flaming Soul does allow Rend to do stuff that Rend cannot otherwise do, because Flaming Soul casts Living Bomb upon dismounting, damaging nearby enemies, which means that you go in with Rend and you get a free 6 gold spell on top. That 6 gold spell is only good against big groups of enemies, but if you meet big groups of enemies, then that makes Rend incredible. So those 2 are the talents that are really competing for the first choice, and Legionnaire is largely useless. It's a little bit hard to pick a talent for Sneed right now, because Land Grab was nerfed. Land Grab is actually the talent that my Sneed currently has. Yeah, my Sneed is only uncommon. Well, be that as it may, now I probably go for Mine is Money Friend, so then Sneed is a miner that mines pretty quickly. A bit situational, are there stuff that we want Sneed to mine? Yeah, it doesn't always help. Then there's also Lead with Greed, and that can give you some extra gold, but triggering Sneed before Greed is now a little bit more difficult, which is also why Land Grab, which gives Sneed more levels, is not as useful anymore. Grommash Hellscream is mainly played with 1 of 2 talents. Either you use Savage Strikes, I like Savage Strikes, deal double damage to enemies who are below 50% health. If you can execute something and then Savage Strikes, that's awesome, and it's also great even by itself. Something gets damaged and Grom comes in and finishes the job. Mirror Image is another way to give Grom more DPS. That DPS is front-loaded then, and yeah, it's also kind of nice. Bladestorm, the area of effect damage seems a little bit weaker. For Cairne Bloodhoof, the most popular talent is Plains Running, move 50% faster and gain the fast trait. So then Cairne can keep up with others and just get into action that much quicker. That said, I do love Reincarnation for value. After death, Cairne resurrects at 50% health once. But I think that's just really sweet. Then there's Aftershock, when stun expires affected enemies are dazed, but that doesn't seem very useful at all. For Baron Rivendare, I would always pick Chill of the Grave. Chill of the Grave, summon skeletal mages instead of warriors, and I think skeletal mages are tremendously good. They're a range unit, they slow down enemies, they are just incredibly powerful. And then they're summoned even when Rivendare is not on the board, so that's just stunning. So Chill of the Grave would always be my choice. Yeah, there's Death Pact, periodical sacrifice a nearby skeleton to be healed. Yeah, you could swarm with skeletons and heal your Rivendare, but that just doesn't seem to be quite as good as just having skeletal mages. And then there's Skeletal Frenzy, nearby allied skeletons gain Bloodlust. So yeah, you could again swarm some stuff, but I mean, Chill of the Grave, it's just so wonderful. For Bloodmage Thalnos, the general best talent is Bane. Bane is a big damage increase and generally the best. Just playing a lot of spells is what you want to do, and Bane really benefits from that. There's also Dominance. Spells costing 4 or more grant an additional level. Yeah, it's kind of nice, but it's a little bit clunky, a little bit hard to get all those levels. And then there's Drain Life with Lifesteal for Thalnos, but that Drain Life just doesn't drain enough life, so that one is kind of out. The new Undead leader Sylvanas Windrunner seems to be mostly played with Black Arrow, and Black Arrow is a good damage increase, so yeah, that's great. Then there's Banshee's Veil, Scream and Death, stunning nearby enemies for 3 seconds. I do love stuns, stuns are always useful, but the damage increase just seems to be a little bit better here. And then there's Forsaken Fury, but it's kind of hard to build around. As for the non-leader minis, we start with Abomination. And for Abomination, Noxious Presence or Cannonball. Noxious Presence, poison nearby enemies every 3 seconds. Cannonball, on deploy and at 50% health, stun nearby enemies for 5 seconds. People generally prefer Cannonball, and that double stun is pretty sweet. On the other hand, Abomination is pretty tanky, and poison every 3 seconds is really good, so Noxious Presence is very good damage increase. I guess Cannonball is still your first choice, and Noxious Presence will be the second. Fresh meat is a little lackluster because it depends on hooking suitable targets that don't already die in one hit, and yeah, it's just not nearly as good as the other two. I'm not much of an angry chicken player, but Walking Crate can help your chicken get to their target, so I guess that's the best one. Sacrifice could be useful with other beasts in suitable beast deck, and then there's Furious Fowl, gain Fury. But in order to activate Fury, the chickens have to keep attacking, and that means that the chickens will have to survive, and that's the hard part, so Furious Fowl is a little bit difficult to activate. Arcane Blast mostly has 2 usable talents that take it into different directions. There's Arcane Power, which makes the initial spell hit much harder, so that can be really good, for example, with Jaina, when the spell really hits that much harder. Then there's Amplification, easy to use, and can be spammed, so that can be useful, for example, with Thalnos, where playing a lot of spells can be useful. Then there's Torrent, gain a level after casting rank 4, but Torrent generally just isn't that good. For Banshee, Will of the Necropolis is generally the most flexible talent, because sometimes Banshee possesses a new target, okay, Will of the Necropolis is kind of wasted, sometimes it possesses something that's already damaged, and Will of the Necropolis is wonderful. So overall it just suits most situations. Because then you have Unholy Frenzy, that Bloodlust for a while, but if you possess something that's not in combat, then that doesn't do anything. And then there's the Soul Eruption, which also deals a little bit of lackluster damage. For Batrider, I prefer the Flaming Pitch. Flaming Pool reduces enemy speed by 30%. I just like when things get slower, and I think the pool is already kind of nice size. Many people do prefer the Enchanted Vials, increase the size of the Flaming Pool by 30%, so then it's a little bit easier to target, it might catch something more in its area. Then there's the Fire Surplus, accidentally vials on the ground burning nearby enemies to touch them, but that just doesn't seem to be nearly on the level of the other two. For Blizzard, the choice is clear, Cold Snap is by far the best talent. It ensures the full damage, it limits movement, it's absolutely perfect. Ice Crown can sometimes help you defensively get double blizzards near your base, but it's just no match for Cold Snap. And then there's Brittle Ice, enemies within take 30% additional damage from physical sources, but that requires that you have some physical sources near your blizzard, so that's really situational and not in the same league at all. For Chain Lightning, I have seen people prefer all 3 options. Brilliant Flash is great because it stuns enemies and stuns are really good. Reverberation adds some flexibility to the spell, although some people think that it becomes too expensive with Reverberation. And then there's Storm's Reach. Dramatically increased jump distance between targets. And that is something that also sees quite a bit of play, so for Chain Lightning they're a little bit different, but all of them can be made to work. For Cheat Death, I prefer Vampirism. It's generally the best because then your troops don't die and then they heal up, so they might live even longer. There are some upsides to Seal Fate. using for final pushes, but then that also means that cheat death becomes less usable in many other generic situations. And then there's Apocalypse. Affected skeletons resurrect at your base when they die, but that requires a very specific build and overall just isn't quite that strong. As for core Hounds, Eternal Bond, resurrection range is unlimited. Then you place them on the line so that they will split push, and then they can resurrect each other even though they're on the opposite sides of the map, and that can be really, really strong, at least when it works. It has been bugged every once in a while. There's also Fiery Rebirth for some damage to nearby enemies, but that's just not as strong as split pushing with them. And then there's Guard Dog, which allows them to do some damage when defending, but that's not usually what you use core Hounds for anyway. For Dark Iron Miner, the Dark Iron Armaments help the miner tank some damage after mining. There is also Dwarven Ambition that adds some damage, but it's usually not a damage dealing unit anyway. And then the Gold Mine, but those mines are just not that impressive. Darkspear Troll has some really impressive talents. There's Big Bad Voodoo, and that adds just crazy survivability to the Troll. It regenerates within combat, so sometimes it helps there, although Troll is quite squishy so it can just die. But if it ever wins a combat, then it just, boom, pops up to full health and it's ready to go again. It's just totally bonkers. There's also some argument to be made for headhunting. On kill, increase attack and movement speed by 10%, so if your troll is on the second line and manages to kill some stuff and survive, then it can become a powerful damage dealing machine. And also Serpent Sting poison is pretty good, against big individual targets especially, so that can help troll deal with some big targets. The Defias Bandits also have 3 useful talents. I think Picklock is generally the best, because Picklock earn extra 2 gold when opening chests, and extra gold is super strong. Chests are not always available in every map, so in some maps it doesn't do anything, but when it works it is just so good. However, there is also Last Resort, which can help control the fight, but it might be of limited use in big group fights. And then there's Deadly Poison, and Poison is good, that's a good chunk of damage, but Defias Bandits are really squishy, so you need something to tank for them, and only then Poison will actually be good. So Picklock would be my first choice out of these. The most commonly used talent with Drake is the Mother Drake, so there's just going to be eggs all over the place when you use Mother Drake. Engulfing Flames with the damage increase is also potentially useful, and then there's Roost, perched on top of a nearby tower, staying there to defend it, which seems kind of useless. The most popular talent for Earth Elemental is the Obsidian Shard, on death split into 2 smaller Earth Elementals, because the unit becomes even more sticky with that, and that's just great. Ready to Rumble can be useful. Earth Elemental likes to ignore other minis, so Taunt on Deploy means that those minis definitely cannot ignore the Earth Elemental, but it's still a little bit lackluster compared to the Shard. And then there's the Shrapnel Blast, but that's just weaker than the other 2 anyway. For Execute, I would go with Bloodthirsty, Bloodlust allies within spell area for 10 seconds, because this basically makes these 2 spells in one, sometimes really 2 spells in one that can hit both enemies and friends with the same cast. Man, that's just beautiful. Killing Spree, if an enemy is killed, the next horde mini costs 1 less, that's quite situational, you often don't get that kill with the Execute. And then there's the Overpower with the knockaway effect, which changes how you would play with the spell, but that's often a downside, so I don't really like that talent all that much. For Fire Elemental, I like Immolation Aura. I like that steady output of damage. Sure, there's also some damage coming from Molten Core, but that's not as easily controlled, so I don't like it that much. And then there's Fan the Flames, which can also give you more damage, but it's even more situational and completely out of your control. For Firehammer, the top choice is Blazing Speed. Fury builds up to 40% higher. That means that you're just going to be able to get so much more damage when the combat goes longer, then it's just great. There's also Heightened Rage, level up upon reaching full Fury, but that's less damage than Blazing Speed in a single long encounter. It can give you multiple levels, but it can only give you multiple levels if Firehammer cools down in between battles. So you need to fight, get a level, then cool down, get another fight, and that's just not going to happen. Then there's Molten Metal, deal 50% more damage to flying enemies, but that's just way too situational to be useful. It could be in some very specific mission, but you just don't want that kind of talent as your first pick. For Flamewaker, I would pick extra damage with Engulf. damage is good. Then there's also Heat Stroke, damaging enemies dazes them. Daze is obviously, it is a control effect, but I think it's the weakest one of them, so I don't like it too much. And then there's Backdraft. Successive attacks increase flame wave distance resets on movement. I do like range, but range in this one is so incredibly situational. You have to be within range already for your first hit, so this is one of those few cases where I actually don't like the additional range. For Footmen, Shield Bash is just universally useful, periodically stun the target, and stuns are really good. Some people also use Fortification with Footmen, especially in healing decks, well, only in healing decks really. Starting with some empty health, then healing them up, then that's plus 30% health. Then there's Last Stand, but then you only have one Footman left and it generally doesn't do enough. For Frostwolf Shaman, I really prefer the Earth Shield. Grant armor to a nearby ally, has 1 charge. You usually always play Shaman with some other unit, some big unit that the Shaman is then behind them to heal, and Earth Shield on those, that's just wonderful, so I do love that one. Shaman has an interesting talent in Earthwall Totem, because it's one of the very few ways that you have to actually heal up your base. But that's usually just not the way you play minis, that you would use minis to heal up your base. Then there's Lightning Master, which does increase Shaman's DPS, but Shaman's base damage is quite lackluster, so I just prefer the Earth Shield to make Shaman better at what Shaman is already doing. For Gargoyle, I use Wing Buffet myself. It's generally the most useful one, as you really want to reach the target, and Gargoyle can be really slow. I know that Obsidian Statue can have some uses, especially in the PvE campaign, because that statue with Taunt, then that just allows your other minis to do things, but I still like having Gargoyle reach the target faster. Then there's Aerial Superiority, which is just way too situational. For Ghoul, Bone Shield helps the Ghoul tank, and Ghoul wants to tank, so pretty easy choice. Sure, there would be Taste for Blood for some extra damage, and then there would be Ravenous, but Ravenous is extra damage but very situationally so, because first you need to fight and then you need to cannibalize, and then after that you need to be fast enough in order to have the fight again, so I just don't like it that much. For Gnoll Brute, I would go for Rabid. Rabid is generally the best because cost reduction is good, and reducing the cost from 3 to 2, that just makes the mini so much more easier to cycle. Thick Hide obviously also has some upsides when there's physical damage coming in, and then there's Pillage, and Pillage just isn't very useful at all because that's not how you play with Gnoll Brute anyway. For Goblin Sapper, I like Turbo Boots. Turbo Boots make them more effective tower killers because they're faster and they kill stuff better, and that's always good. If you don't need the extra speed, well, extra boom does add some more damage, but then it's harder to reach the target, so I just prefer reaching the target. Then there's Crude Gunpowder, but that mostly helps if your sappers fail to do what you were trying to do with them, so why are you planning to fail? I don't like that talent. Gryphon Rider has 3 interesting talents. I usually use Mighty Throw, allows you to outrange some enemies, so that's really sweet. I do think that Odin's Fury is also potential, because gains Fury, which means that if you're hitting a bigger target, Gryphon Rider sometimes lacks a little bit of damage, so if you try to use Gryphon Rider to kill something like Molten Giants, then Odin's Fury would be exactly the tool to use in that. Then there's also Airdrop. Airdrop hasn't seen a lot of play, but I have seen it used in some Hogger decks, just giving more levels. Harpies are one of the best units in the game, and I really love them with the infectious swipes. Then Harpies, when they hit a big target with all of that poison, they're just going to melt them down. There's also Talon Dive, which is good against medium-sized targets, but typically I want my Harpies to kill something really big. And then there's Trinket Collectors, and Trinket Collectors has seen play, especially in some PvP maps. Whenever there is a map where mining is important, mines are difficult to get to, and some flying fast unit might be able to get to those mines, then Harpies with Trinket Collector can be really strong. However, whenever there is not a map like that, then Trinket Collectors just makes Harpies worse, so then you don't want to have that equipped. So Infectious Swipes overall, I think, is the best one. For Harvest Golem, I really like Unstable Core, because there's a stun, and then there's a resurrection, and then there's another stun, so it's just stun. Trojan chickens do add some damage, so that can be helpful, but typically you use Harvest Golem in scenarios where the stun ability is going to give your minis an advantage in the fight, so I just prefer the Unstable Core. Then there's Bountiful Harvest, but I don't think it's very useful at all. The main choice with Holy Nova is Inner Fire, because then you first heal your allies, and then they also gain armor and resist, so it's almost like healing them twice. Of course, Renew is also additional healing, but Inner Fire's healing is just more effective when it's cast in the middle of combat. Amplify Magic, that will require a very specific deck, and I don't really like that one. For Huntress, it's choice between Elven Might, deal 50% additional damage to the initial target, and Shadow Meld gains Stealth and Ambush. Both can be strong. I highly prefer Shadow Meld, because having these kinds of units with Stealth, I just love that. That's really, really useful. But I also see Elven Might used a lot. Darnasian Steel, those additional bounces, that seems to be a little bit too situational. For Living Bomb, the most common option is Blast Radius. It adds more damage, it's usually top pick. Then there's also Burn of Fate, some movement control element, but it's a little bit lackluster. And then there's Chain Reaction, but that one requires new targets, so they could really go off. So overall, I prefer the Blast Radius. For Meatwagon, it's all about range. Filet Trebuchet, generally the best. New range, more range, just hits so far away, that's incredible. Greased Gears gains Fury, okay, that adds some damage, but you have to get closer to deal that damage, so I just highly prefer range when it's available. And then there's Meat and Bones, and that actually just reduces your damage, so I don't like that one at all. For Molten Giant, Blood of the Mountain adds more damage, and adding more damage is nice. Threatening Presence can be useful in drawing attention, although usually you place the Molten Giant so that it draws attention anyway. And then there's Bolster, which is just too situational. For Mountaineer, the top pick is Intimidation. That taunt on the bear can really save your gunner. Frenzied Spirit can add a little bit of damage, but if it's the bear that dies first, then the Mountaineer is going to go soon afterwards anyway. And then there's Mend Pets, but I don't really like that one. You need other nearby beasts, otherwise it's just completely useless. Murloc Tidehunters, I actually like all of the talents, but I generally use Safety Bubble. Safety Bubble is just so good because Tidehunters are incredibly fragile, so Safety Bubble just gives them a get away from jail free card, and that's great. Obviously, Careful Aim, gain +2 range. Range is always so incredibly good, but because they are so incredibly fragile, then I just prefer the Bubble. Because sometimes they get hit by a spell or something and Bubble saves them, but Careful Aim is close. And Morlocks isn't terrible either. Just more Murlocs, more damage. So Murloc Tidehunters actually have 3 pretty interesting talents. For Necromancer, you want Jeweled Skulls, because Jeweled Skulls give you more mages, and mages are really, really good, so that's just it. Cult of the Damned can get you some more skeletons as well, but skeletons are not as good as mages, so Jeweled Skulls it is. Then there's Breath of the Dying. On death summon 5 skeletons, which could also have some uses, but again, those are also not mages, and you want mages. For Ogre Mage, Frostfire Bolt is wonderful, because it adds movement control to your already powerful AoE damage attack. It's just splendid. There is of course also Avarice, which gives Ogre Mage himself also Bloodlust, which is also more damage, so that's kind of nice, but I do prefer control aspect in general. And then there's Ignite, but Ignite is generally just weaker than the other 2. For Plague Farmer, the choice is clear, it is Splashing Pumpkins, because range is king, and the other 2 talents aren't that awesome, so Splashing Pumpkins it is. Parting Gift, it does give you something when the unit dies, so that's kind of nice. And then there's Virulence, which adds some damage, but only sometimes, so it just cannot compete with additional range. For Polymorph, I really like the Golden Fleece. That gives you more gold. Gold is life. Economy, this game is so much about economy, so that gold advantage, yeah, Golden Fleece it is. Exploding Sheep could give a little bit more damage. And then there's Stable Transfiguration, which actually is usually counterproductive. It's worse than not having it. I mean, it's there to buy you some time so that you can do other stuff while the enemy is incapacitated, but it just isn't usually useful, so Golden Fleece it is. For Prowler, On the Prowl is great. I love On the Prowl, because then you're in stealth, so you're not targeted, you're not attacked, you can go to where you need to be, and then you attack from stealth with surprise. That's just wonderful. Backleader can also work with beast armies, because then everything around you just becomes that much stronger. And then there's Predatory Instincts, which kind of looks nice, okay, deals lots of damage on the initial hit, but getting that hit safe and sound with On the Prowl is typically just superior to having a bigger hit from Predatory Instincts. For Pyromancer, I prefer Pyroblast. The difference between not running Pyroblast and running Pyroblast is like day and night. The Pyromancer is one-shotting so many more things with Pyroblast and then they don't get to shoot back, and I just love it. I think that's clearly the best talent. Although I see a lot of people recommend Conflagrate, which doubles the splash area, so okay, then it can deal damage to more minions, but usually I just want them to die in one shot, so I highly prefer the Pyroblast myself. And then there's Blaze of Glory, which I have never seen anyone recommend. I don't think it's very useful. Quillbore is a flexible unbound unit, and I like Quillbore with Tunnel Vision. Then it's just even faster, it responds quicker, you can react better, and that's what the game is all about. Sure, Bramble Burst is not bad, it adds some damage. And then there's Bristleback, but that's even less damage, so the Bramble Burst is simply just better typically. But I like Tunnel Vision because I like to be able to respond as quickly as possible to events in the game. For Raptors, strength in numbers, no questions asked. Deal 10% more damage for each other Raptor nearby, and typically if you play a Raptor deck you're going to have a lot of Raptors, so that's a lot of damage. On Fast Food, well, the healing is typically just not enough, and Motivation, the extra damage is just too situational, so strength in numbers is the top pick for this one. For Safe Pilot, the most commonly used option is the Gnomish Cloaking Device. Deploy from the explosion with Stealth and Ambush, so then your Safe Pilot comes down, explodes, it's in stealth, so unless opponent has something that handles stealth, then it gets to target in peace and then it shoots again, so quite powerful. However, if they can handle that Stealth Pilot, then you are in a bit of trouble, so I actually prefer coming in hot myself. It's great because it's guaranteed damage, it's fast deploy, so it gives you more flexibility and it gives you more speed in applying Safe Pilot, so I just like that one better. And then there's the Gnomish Modernizer, but it's not generally useful at all. For Skeleton Party, the most commonly used talent is the 5-man, summons a skeleton tank, rogue, priest and 2 mages. It's probably the most useful all-round talent. However, when I have met the skeleton parties in PvP, for example, the one that has caused me most trouble is the Ritual of Rime. Summon 5 skeleton mages who guard the deploy location. Yeah, and they can be also used to attack, so 5 skeleton mages attacking your tower with a tank, that is really, really painful. So I like Ritual of Rime a lot. I actually only have my skeleton party currently at Uncommon, and I picked Corpse Run, and I can see that it's lackluster in comparison to what I've seen the other 2 talents do. For skeletons, it's clearly Exhume. If deployed near a tower or meeting stone, deploy +2 additional skeletons. Yeah, that's just great. Then it's a skeleton party, and it's just wonderful. Questing Buddies doesn't do much, and Cackle does even less, so Exhume it is. The Smoke Bomb talents are generally not super impressive. Through the Shadows, affected minis move 50% faster until unstealth is probably the strongest one. Then the Band of Thieves grant +1 level to cycle minis within, so there's some limited uses for that in specific decks. And Strangers in the Night, which is quite confusing, so Through the Shadows is probably the strongest of these. For Spiderlings, Envenom adds a lot more damage, and a lot more damage is what you want out of them. Bloated Carapace, Explode on Death, poisoning nearby enemies, it's just not dealing enough damage. Then there is Frostbite, which means that they can slow down the movement and attack speed of the enemy that they're hitting, but often there's more than just one enemy around, and then that single Frostbite just doesn't do nearly that much. So the damage from Envenom is what I really like. For Stonehoof Tauren, there is a talent choice that just changes what the Tauren can do. That talent is Momentum. After connecting a charge, immediately charge a second time if possible. So your Tauren is going to meet a tank and ranged team. It charges the tank, and then with Momentum, it immediately charges the ranged unit and starts speeding that one down. Just a wonderful thing, and something that Tauren cannot do without that talent. Sure, Pummel. After connecting a charge, stun the target for 3 seconds. 3 second stun is great. But if it's on the tank and not on the ranged unit, then it's not that great actually. So Momentum just makes the unit. Then there's Provoke, which doesn't do much. Vultures, having Migration is like playing Vultures again. Vultures summon more Vultures, and they're summoned in a new wave, and then the new wave can summon more Vultures, and it's endless. Sure, Feeding Frenzy, the flock gains Bloodlust for 5 seconds when spawning a new Vulture can also be great, but only if you get the kills and can keep the one wall going. And then there's Tendon Rip, which just doesn't do much. Wars on Grunts, its Blood Pact is the universally useful one. When a grunt dies, the other gains Bloodlust. However, I would really consider picking Command. Command nearby beast allies deal 30% additional damage. Because Blood Pact is not super strong at all times, sure, you need some beasts around if you want to use Command, but if you have beasts, then that Command just surpasses Blood Pact. Then there's Guard Duty, which just doesn't do much at all. Warsong Raider, Saboteur allows you to do a lot more damage against towers, especially if Raider alone against the tower, then that tower just cannot take the Raider down. Sure, raising focus has its uses, then the Raider will focus on towers and bosses, but it also has downsides, sometimes you want it to actually hit minis. And then there's Thunder Armor, but that's way too situational. Whelbecs are another mini that completely changes when you have talents. When you don't have talents, well, then the eggs start popping up and then what? But when you have talents. Flame Burst, damage nearby enemies when hatching. Flame Burst damage is just awesome, so now you have 3 mini AoEs in addition to the whelps. Then there's also Rookery. Rookery is also fine. When one egg hatches, the others hatch immediately. So Rookery adds more DPS over time. It used to add even more, because it used to summon an extra whelp. Now that the extra whelp is cut, then that means that Flame Burst is often better, because the whelps don't get to attack enough times to make Rookery the better one. And then there's Chromatic Plating, which is just weaker than the other two. And finally, we have Worgen, and Premeditation increase ambush damage by 50%. That's a lot of damage, it's clearly the best talent. Worgen can just really go to town with that one. Sure, there's Lone Wolf that can add some gold, but not nearly always, so I don't really like that much. It's like a conditional cost reduction and it's just not good enough. And then there's Frenzy, which is also situational, so Premeditation, getting that guaranteed damage in. And those were all the best talents for minis available right now in the game, so I hope this guide helps you choose good talents for your minis, so that you will get the most out of them. Thank you for watching. Click like and subscribe if you enjoyed this, and a special thanks to all of my Patreon supporters, YouTube members and Twitch subscribers who make all of these videos possible.